Topic here is economics and slavery. So first off, I'm going to say that this screencast and this assignment is not made to be offensive in any way. I'm simply trying to get students to think about the economics of slavery and why the institution lasted so long. This is a class that goes more in detail into the institution of slavery. And so we are going to be addressing these three key causes here, and I'm going to ask students to pick. So the first task we want to do is figure out what was slavery about. Are you going to say that it was all about race, politics, or economics? And keep in mind, each of these three issues will be addressed in great detail so we could come to some understanding as to why the institution of slavery lasted so long in the United States and how that leads to segregation and other discriminatory acts directed towards African Americans in the United States. Again, not meant to be offensive in any way, just simply trying to look at the institution of slavery from an economic point of view and why the economics may have created a situation that led to, racism and influencing in politics. But ultimately, to answer the question, why did slavery last so long? Developing the continent. So we're going to first start off with the map of the United States with the Native American tribes. And so we have a bunch of land. We have no civilization other than the civilization that the Native Americans have built. But that is a civilization that is going to be altered as a result of European colonization. So the question next is going to be, well, how? How are you going to turn this heavily, this heavy vegetated area into a society? So the questions are going to ask you to pick a labor force. So here you see, you can pick 100 Europeans, Native Americans, and indentured servants. The problem with indentured servants is that you have to let them go. So what you're going to see is that the need for a labor force is going to lead to a situation where out of that need, you're going to see choices be made. So the first Africans coming here were indentured servants, which means that they were coming to the United States. How do we know that? Let's go to this particular chart. Where is that one here? This section right here, this timeline that looks at the early 1600s, and the first Africans to come here were indentured servants, which means that at some point they are going to be free. So the first Africans coming here were individuals who are indentured servants, which means at some point they were going to be free. So how did we get from the first Africans being free to what I'm going to refer to as permanent, involuntary, hereditary servitude? Well, that's what this screencast is primarily about. So let's see the first item. So we need a labor force to deal with that vegetation. And now we have yet a new option. So in this particular, option, you have the transatlantic slave trade that is about to really pick up. And, you already had enslavement in Africa going on since the mid 1400s. So there is a slave trade that is already in existence. And looking at this section here, if you're going to use African labor as another option to this one, now here are your options. So you can, tribe A, which would be here, tribe B, C, and tribe D, it's free. Which one would you acquire? If you're going to say you're going to go to D because it's the cheapest, then that means that you are going to have issues because Europeans are going to have a difficult time going into the interior of Africa to capture some of those slaves. And this is the part where things get a little tricky. You notice I put a dollar value to each tribe, and you come to find out that Africans participated in the slave trade as well. So when we look at the triangle trade map here, and I'm not trying to make any commentary here on involvement in Africans participating in the slave trade for any other reason other than the economics, which is the point of this. This is about the economics of slavery. Looking at the triangle trade here, we see that there are items that are going into Africa, rum, manufactured goods to Africa. So if things are going into Africa, that means items need to go out. And the items that we are talking about here are human beings. They're not viewed as humans. They're viewed as items. They are nothing more than machines. That's the way these individuals are viewed. You'll see why that plays a role later on. So the argument here is that when we go back to the reading from Blassingame that we will read at a later date, you're going to learn about the African tribes that were conquering their own brothers and sisters, and they were conquering their own brothers and sisters, sending them to the coast and then trading them to Europeans, and then the Europeans would give them, European goods in exchange for Africans. So you have Africans involved in the slave trade as well, and that adds yet another layer, another problem to the situation. Again, this is about the economics of slavery here. So when we click this link, we see this interactive map that starts in the 1400s. I guess I started a little late. And you'll see the slave trade. Remember, 1600s is when we're concerned about the North American continent. So we'll start to see those numbers. And again, what we're looking at here are people. These are human beings that are being sent from Africa to Central, North, and South America. So this is around the time where you're going to see the implementation of what becomes known as the slave codes. And we have not fought the American Revolution at this particular point. The numbers pick up. And again, we are talking about human beings. And there they go. Again, we still did not get to the American Revolution. That's coming. About the point with the American Revolution. Which starts the debate in this country from a political point of view, or the politics of slavery. All right, I'm going to end that here. Get back. So for the most part, slavery is a global event. So the question here is, is slavery about politics, economics, or race? In this particular image, you see this device. And again, if you need to get Africans from the interior, you need to figure out a way to move these individuals, these human beings. So this device, you can attach, a chain to this, and then you could link that to the head of another slave, and you could march them into the interior. The mere fact that this is a device that was invented shows that there was a problem. The problem maybe of slaves trying to run away, and this device being designed to, deal with that particular issue. So when you have a patent, when you have, people making money off of such an item, that's what we mean by that economics of slavery. Like that, again, that's the focus point here. Let's move on. Let's see what else we got. Permanent, involuntary, hereditary servitude. So once you think about what this phrase means, take it word by word, figure out what that issue is. And here I use a term that some people are probably going to find offensive. Again, we're looking at the time period of the day. So when we look at this particular timeline, this section here looks at what becomes known as the slave codes. And the slave codes were a series of laws that were passed. You see Virginia, you see Connecticut, and slowly the laws were passed to take away the status of the freed indentured servant. Remember, the first Africans coming here were indentured servants, and then you start to see laws being passed. And the laws being passed were designed to make the transition from freedom to permanent involuntary hereditary servitude. So now why I bring up this particular situation, again, this term right here, I know some people are going to find it offensive, but it's used in the reading. So what we're talking about here is somebody who is black as well as white, and that acts as evidence throughout the South that interracial sexual relationships are taking place. Whether or not that is taking place because of force is another topic of discussion. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is when we look at the slave codes, one that is very telling, for society, when a man and a woman in the 1600s have a child, the child's social status is determined by the male. While the slave codes are interesting and significant because if this is a slave woman and this is the slave master, if they engage in a sexual act that produces a child, the question here is, what is this child? Is this child born free or born a slave? So if we use early 1600s, that would say that this child is born free and probably at the mercy of the slave master. So the slave codes are significant because they resolve some of these loopholes. And the loopholes are changed to suggest the social status being determined by the mother. So in this particular same situation, we have the slave master, we have the slave, they have a child. You've changed the law to say the social status of the child is determined by the mother, which would then, the mother is a slave, the child is a slave. So this is outlined in the slave codes here, and do not mix up the slave codes with the black codes. Slave codes are 1600s, where we make the transition to permanent involuntary hereditary servitude, whereas 1800s after the Civil War, the black codes are the codes that lead to segregation. But similarities do exist. We're talking about state laws that were passed to deny the rights of the indentured servant or the freed slave after the Civil War. And that's why I use this particular language here, permanent involuntary hereditary servitude, and the fact that there seems to be, sexual relationships developing with the slaves and non-slaves. So the black codes, we already addressed some of these. And again, the goal is to create permanent involuntary hereditary servitude. That seems to be the end goal.